Hi, my name is Karl Didier, and I currently work for Rainforest Trust as the Director of Science and Monitoring. The story from the field that I will be sharing today is from a previous project that I worked on earlier in my career. The project in question was focused on conserving a huge tropical forest landscape. The scope of the project was literally tens of thousands of square kilometers in size, encompassing almost 10 protected areas. The project was complex, involving conservation of multiple threatened species, freshwater and terrestrial ecosystems, and a range of threats and complex socioeconomic drivers typical of projects in the tropics. The project was a long-term investment to integrate and strengthen the management of protected areas, and we expected it would need to run for many years to be effective. Over the first few years, the project had multiple donors and principally relied on one large donor to keep it alive and strong. After 3 or 4 years of operating, we had a good set of committed government and NGO partners and a good plan for strengthening and integrating natural resources management among the protected areas in the landscape, including an action plan, a monitoring plan, and a financial sustainability plan. The next step was really to launch specific natural resource management strategies, mostly in pilot sites, and to work over time to scale those up and integrate them throughout the protected areas in the landscape. The project's major donor requested a new proposal to help cover the next phase of our work. The team expected the new proposal to be funded in a similar way to previous versions of our proposals, basically meaning that there were multiple years supporting multiple staff and for a fairly large amount of money. For the first version of the proposal, the team wrote an ambitious, multifaceted project to implement 6 major strategies to manage things like hunting and fishing and tourism, and to combat deforestation and fires along with monitoring efforts. The first version of the proposal turned out to be $4 million, a 3-year project with the participation of lots of staff and multiple partners. Unfortunately, as it turned out, the donor appeared to be going through a major shift in their own strategy and focus and asked us to reduce the size of the proposal. The team knew that the original proposal for $4 million was totally overambitious, but we wanted to present our big plan and see what the donor would say. We also included lots of planning in the budget because we expected that the donor would eventually ask for a reduced budget. So when we were asked to cut the budget by 1/3 and revise the proposal based on that reduction, we weren't thrilled, but we weren't really surprised either. Our first priority in making cuts was to ensure that we did not need to reduce staff, as the staff represented the accumulated institutional knowledge and experience of our team. If you have to cut a staff person, it can be expensive, time-consuming, and even legally complex to try to add that staff person back to your team again later. Plus later, they might not be available, adding to the time and costs of finding a person with similar skills. So most institutions, rightly so, try as hard as possible not to cut staff if budget cuts roll around. Our second priority in making the first set of cuts was to maintain our 6 major strategies and to keep moving forward on these strategies even if progress might be slower over time. All in all, we wanted to use a scalpel in the first set of budget cuts instead of a big knife, doing a lot of line-by-line budget cuts like reducing travel and meeting costs, cutting the padding that we'd originally included, and at points reducing activities within a strategy. For example, instead of piloting our fisheries management program in 3 protected areas, we just decided to do it in only 1. Using that scalpel, we were able to reduce the budget from $4 million to about $2.7 million. Unfortunately, it turned out that that first budget cut wasn't sufficient. The team received some bad news that the donor was really shifting directions and doing that shift quickly and wanted to wind down investment in our project. And we needed to reduce the project again, this time from a 3-year project to a 1-year project, and from about a $2.7 million budget to a $200,000 budget. And this was the team's major donor. We knew immediately that we'd have to make some tough, unpleasant decisions. At first, the big budget cut came as a shock to everyone. In the first round, decisions were made jointly by a team about how to cut the budget. But with the drastic reductions at hand, it was clear that senior management had to take the tough decisions about what strategies would be our priority, and very likely have to reduce staff. This was going to be a big knife operation, not a scalpel operation as we originally thought. Functionally, we had to prioritize which of our 6 major strategies were most important, would have the biggest impact on threats and conservation targets, and were the most in line with our overall direction of the organization. In the end, we ended up maintaining 2 of the 6 original strategies that we put in the proposal. We had to cut about a quarter of our staff, and we had to work hard to find other resources to maintain the rest of the staff until we could find other donors. However, we did do one clever thing. Given the drastic reductions in the project, we asked the donor if we could change our proposal a bit to include more time and resources dedicated to program fundraising and to seeking other donors. They agreed to this important addition. Obviously, staff reductions in a situation like this are the hardest and most complex kind of decisions you make in conservation. We tried to be strategic, to choose the strategies that were the best, and then to maintain the staff that were key to those strategies. But being strategic doesn't make it at all easier. It's important to realize that in conservation, there will always be a tension between what implementers think is most important and what donors think is most important. As an implementer, it's part of your job to sell your ideas to donors, but you won't always be successful. Also challenging in this process was communications, especially communications between our team and the donor. Those communications were not at all straightforward. There were a lot of intermediaries in the communication, a lot of mixed and evolving messages. Some of this communication difficulty is unavoidable when you're working with large and complex organizations. But from the perspective of an implementing project, it's a really good idea to keep up to date on the strategic directions of your major donors. Also, I think our approach to prioritizing keeping staff in the face of budget cuts was in general the right one. Your staff are more than just a set of people who have skills to do things. They have accumulated institutional, specific knowledge about how to implement projects that is always lost to a certain degree when you lose those staff. When you do have to cut staff, go back to your mission and your priority strategies to try to help you make the tough decisions. Finally, remember that fundraising is part of your program and that you should incorporate the time and associated money for fundraising as part of your project budgets. Sometimes as overhead, you might call it indirect cost or administrative costs, but sometimes you might include it directly as some sort of effort to secure sustainable financing. I don't have a lot to add, only to say that I'm a big fan of the growing effort to explicitly measure and test effectiveness of conservation actions. One cool place to check out and support, if you haven't already, is conservationevidence.com and the Associated Scientific Journal. I'm also a big fan of the growing effort to track costs of conservation actions and to do so in a consistent, systematic way. If you're interested in this effort, a good place to start and to figure out how you can contribute to the effort is a recently published paper on standardizing costs in conservation by Iacona et al. In the 2018 volume of Conservation Biology.